Welcome, everybody. Well, hopefully everybody got a chance to listen to the longest, I think, State of the Union address ever, at least the longest one I can remember watching. And, it started even later for me here in Puerto Rico because we're an hour past East Coast time. So the president started the talk at 10 o'clock. So it was beyond midnight by the time he wrapped it up. And anyway, I was particularly upset about the whole thing, not just because it was unnecessarily long. And I don't object to some of the medals that were awarded to some deserving people, although I don't know when that became part of the State of the Union. I don't know when they started, I don't know if I even remember a State of the Union where they handed out, these presidential awards. But what bothered me about the State of the Union was all the lies, the exaggerations that were told. I mean, it wasn't just spin. I mean, they're always trying to put a good spin on stuff, right? No matter who you are, you always come out and say that the economy is doing good. The State of the Union is strong, even when that's not the case. But the lies really are just over the top. I mean, not that everything that the president said was a lie, but I want to focus on those because there were a lot of them. And the ones that I'm most concerned about and the ones I'm going to discuss on today's podcast are the ones that relate specifically to the economy, because that's really, my area of expertise, what I think is relevant to the audience, to my clients, is the economy. I mean, there were lies that had nothing to do with the economy, but I'm just going to let those slide. And I just don't really feel like discussing them all. I was writing down a bunch of notes as I was watching the address. And I'm just going to kind of discuss what I wrote down, in the order that I jotted it down, which I suppose is the order in which the president spoke these things, because I was writing them, as I was listening. So one of the first things he started to talk about was housing. And he talked about housing several times during his talk. But one of the things he flat out came out and said, and he had mentioned this before, and I pointed out the absurdity of it before. And this is not a lie. This is just an example of really bad policy that he's advocating. Trump said his main goal is to keep housing prices high and to make sure they keep going up. Now, how is that helpful to young families who want to buy a home? Why is preventing real estate from becoming more affordable, a good objective for the president to have? The first-time home buyer now is 40 years old. That's the oldest, and I don't know when. But the reason people have to wait until they're 40 to buy a home is because it takes a lot more money to afford one. There may be some young families who would like to have a home, in their early 30s. The best way to make that possible is for the price to go down. But Donald Trump said he doesn't want that. And he specifically said the reason. He wants the people who own homes to be rich, to stay rich. He's very excited that people own overpriced homes. Now, how do I know the homes are overpriced? Because they're not selling. There's a record now amount of unsold homes. Real estate transactions are collapsing because there's a big disconnect between the price and what people can afford to pay. Now, ultimately, the market will correct that disconnect with a drop in prices. That's inevitable. That is the free market solution, when you have overpriced homes. The prices come down because home prices are worth what the buyer can afford to pay. Because at the end of the day, if you have to sell your house, you can only sell based on what somebody is willing and able to pay. Now, if you don't want to sell your house, then you don't have to sell. But you can't just pretend that your house is worth, let's say, $1 million if you can't sell it for $1 million. If you'd have to drop the price to $600,000 to sell it, then that's what it's worth. But what Donald Trump wants is for people to keep pretending that it's worth $1 million. He doesn't want them to have to deal with reality. He wants homeowners to live in fantasy land. But of course, if they're in fantasy land, maybe he thinks they'll vote Republican or something if they think that their homes are still worth, those high prices. But he wants to solve the affordability problem by forcing down mortgage rates. And he bragged about that, about having Fannie and Freddie buy mortgages. Now, one thing he didn't mention for all you people who own Fannie and Freddie stock, it's one of the Trump trades, he didn't mention anything about any kind of Fannie and Freddie IPO. So that obviously is not something that's on the president's agenda because he would have, laid it out in the State of the Union. But his main concern is keeping mortgage rates as low as possible. And that probably means not doing anything with Fannie and Freddie. Because anything he does with Fannie and Freddie is ultimately going to lead to higher interest rates. And he wants lower interest rates because he wants to enable people to overpay for homes by giving them cheap credit. But that is, again, the worst economic policy. We need higher interest rates. Interest rates are too low and real estate prices are too high. And the reason that real estate prices are too high is because interest rates were so low. The solution to this problem is not to try to maintain artificially high home prices by suppressing interest rates even more and exacerbating both problems. The solution is to allow home prices to fall so that people can afford to buy them without borrowing so much money. So the mortgage is not as important. If the home price goes way down and you don't have to borrow as much money, you can still have lower monthly payments. But Trump wants to achieve home affordability by artificially suppressing the mortgage rate to make it easier for people to overpay for these homes. But this is horrible economic policy. It's the type of economic policy that created the 2008 financial crisis. Yet this is the policy that Donald Trump is committed to pursuing. And all Republicans should be against this policy. But of course, they won't be because they all follow Trump almost in lockstep. I mean, if you don't, you're going to get, vilified. You're going to get primaried. The president is going to do everything he can to get back at anybody who doesn't fall in line. That's why, it's not just Trump that is telling lies in the State of the Union. It's all the Republicans that are behind these lies and that repeat these lies and that make excuses for these lies. There are no excuses. I can't stand it when politicians lie, which is why I just can't stand politicians because that's pretty much all they do. And that's why, I don't really have a career in politics because I don't like to lie. Not only I don't like to be lied to, and I don't like to lie. And so it just really bothers me when I hear this stuff. Anyway, so the next thing he started talking about, he started bragging about the stock market almost immediately, right? Into the State of the Union. He's bragging about 50,000 Dow when the Dow isn't even at 50,000 anymore. And in fact, I think as of maybe yesterday, the market was up a bit today, but the S&P 500 was actually negative on the year. So we were having a down year almost at the end of the first 2 months. But the Dow right now is about 49,400 and change because it was up a little over 300 points today. But he repeated, he said that we achieved 50,000 Dow 4 years ahead of schedule. First of all, what schedule was there? There was never a schedule about when the Dow was supposed to go anywhere. And of course, the president's job is not to get the Dow to go up. That's not why we elect a president. He's not in charge of the stock market. The stock market's supposed to reflect the value of companies. It's not like, the president has some kind of mandate to have the stock market hit a particular level. But according to Trump, we got to 50,000 4 years ahead of schedule. But there was no schedule. But the reality is, when he took office, the Dow was at 44,000. He really thought that the schedule was for the Dow to go up 6,000 points in 4 years. That'd have been like the worst 4-year period in the history of the Dow. I mean, other than maybe a major bear market like in the 70s or something. I mean, that would be nothing. That would be like an average of 3% a year on the Dow. That was the schedule. I mean, who thought that was the schedule? I mean, everybody was way more optimistic than that. And he keeps trying to take credit for this miracle that he got the Dow to 50,000 in a year, when that's only about 12% higher than it was when he took office. And that's much less than what the Dow went up during the first year of Biden. I mean, he talks about how Biden was the worst president in the history of the world, yet the Dow did better under Biden than it's doing under Trump. So, if the Dow is the benchmark, we got a worse economy now than we had under Biden. Now, I don't think we had a good economy under Biden either, but we don't have one under Trump. And you certainly can't claim we have one based on the stock market. And again, I mentioned this in an earlier podcast. We've got like the worst performing stock market in the world since Trump was elected. My foreign stock funds, I mean, we're up, I don't know, better than 10%, 11, 12%. Gold fund, up 25% or something this year. But my foreign funds are up double digit. The U.S. market is flat. So if you're going to base the economy on the stock market, how is he saying we got the hottest economy in the world? Which he said again. He repeated that. We have the hottest economy in the world. Well, based on the stock market, we've got the coldest, because we've certainly got the coldest stock market in the world. You could easily see that in the numbers. So if you're going to, grade our economy based on the stock market, which Trump wants to do, it's an F. Stock market performance is bad. But Trump just pretends it's great. Doesn't even matter what the truth is. He just, repeats that lie. He just tells it loud and over again. And everybody just seems to accept it as if it's actually true. Anyway, we got a quick commercial.